Hey folks, it's Andy with Guitar Interactive Magazine. Right, in the last Making Tracks column, we took a look at what we really mean when we talk about phase and polarity in sound. This time we're going to extend that out just a little bit and look at some practical examples. Right, so let's start off by having a look at what happens when we reverse the polarity of a single source. And we're going to start off by having a look and a listen with a microphone on the front of a guitar cabinet. Okay, now if I just open up the channel for that, and you see we've got the polarity, but I can press that to reverse and see if we can tell any difference. So just kicking off. And I don't know about you, but I can hear absolutely no difference between the two there. Where we might notice a bit of a difference is if we have a look at this one, and what we've got here is just a sample of a Sawtooth Wave. And if I zoom in on the waveform, we get a clear idea of the shape of it. And Sawtooth Waves are usually considered to be fairly easy to hear. And if I just zoom in right on one of the transitions, I have switched the polarity of each of these segments over. So when it goes from the one colour to the other colour, it's actually flipping over the Sawtooth Wave. But see if you can actually hear any difference between the two when I just kick this off to play now. And I think there is a difference to be heard. We are a lot better at picking differences of absolute polarity on asymmetric waves and lower frequencies. So I think we can establish there that you can hear absolute polarity, but that it is incredibly difficult to do it with something a little bit more real world. Right, the next thing that we're going to have a look at is what happens when we put two microphones on the front of a cab. So the microphones are obviously not going to be in the exact same place, but this is done with a pair of similar mics. So if we just have a listen to what we've got on each of them. And you can hear that those are fairly similar. And then if I bring both of those cabs into play, the sounds are going to add together. And if I do my polarity reverse bit, and what we can quite clearly hear there is that when one of those is out of polarity with the other, the signal gets a lot thinner and a lot smaller. And it may be that you prefer the sound of that, and that's quite all right. But what we're hearing is that we're not getting complete cancellation between the two when I invert one. That's because the microphones are in slightly different places, so they're picking up slightly different parts of the waveform. But there's definitely a sense there that in polarity is a completely different sound to out of polarity. Okay, the final one that we're going to take a quick look at is what happens when we get a front of cab and rear of cab microphone. So again, just to remind ourselves, the front of cab mic and the rear mic, which is going to have a bit of a different sound to it. You tend to get a bit less top end off the back of a cab. And we can add those together. And if I then again do the reverse polarity trick, now bearing in mind, these are microphones that are pointing in opposite directions. And again, they're a really noticeable difference in sound, this time sounding much fuller when the signals aren't in opposite polarity, which allows for the fact that those diaphragms are pointing in opposite directions and getting opposite sides of the same movement from the speaker. Now, if I just zoom in on the waveform that we've got here, I just center that and zoom in, let's say here. And you can see that, okay, so the microphones were not the exact same distance. And you can see that we've generally got a tendency for them to be opposite polarity, but the waveforms are really quite different. And you can get some different effects out of these things by, as simple as just shoving one along a bit. And of course, you're going to reach a point where you shove them far enough that you're effectively going to move them into or out of phase. And again, I think the point is to be made here that there is no absolute right or wrong. Go with the sound that you like. If you knock the polarity one way or the other on one of the tracks and you like the sound, but it comes out a lot quieter, you can always just turn it up in the mix. Okay, then, those were pretty simple examples. They were deliberately set up to give the biggest difference that I could manage between things being in phase and matched polarity and the opposite view of that. Now, the cancellation is going to be at its greatest when the levels are the most matched. And what we can do then is we can actually change the relative levels of the signals. So just add, the secondary signal into our main signal to get the kind of sound that we like there. So if we kick that off. And yet that seems a little sort of odd at first, that as you increase one of the levels, the signal gets quieter, but that's because we are inverted and cancelling out. You can, of course, do it without the cancellation. And in this case, because these sounds are so similar, they just basically seem to get louder. But certainly when you invert the polarity of one and then feed that to the one up, you can kind of find sounds that you may actually decide you prefer to the fully in phase sound. And the other thing, just to cover slightly here, I think, is that as well as having the options for polarity and polarity inversion, commonly known as in and out of phase, we can get plugins which gives us the options for the in-between positions. So and it's quite possible that by playing around with something like this, by the way, from Audiocation, the Phase plugin is freeware, so just go out and grab a copy of that if you want to have a play. Okay, I hope that's worth some food for thought. The bottom line of all this really is that you just have to put some microphones on some noises and try it and see. It's always useful to have a mental picture of what the waveforms are looking like, to be clear about what people really do mean when they talk about moving phase, when they talk about flipping polarity. But the bottom line is none of that stuff matters when the final recording's made. All that we care about at that point is what it sounds like. So there are no rules. If you do something people are saying, oh, that sounds phasey, that sounds out of phase, it's not right, but it's the sound that you want, go with it. Absolutely run with it and trust your ears over your eyes and anything that you might learn here or anywhere else. What it sounds like is the only thing that matters. And if you get a sound which is thin and weak and out of phase and trebly and edgy and all of that, and it's exactly what your mix needs, but it's too quiet, push up the level and be happy. That's what it's all about. This is art with a little tiny bit of science, not the other way around. Okay, I am Andy, this is Guitar Interrupted Magazine. This is our second dip into phase and polarity. We'll have another look next time at what happens when we've got lots of different things making noise at the same time. Until then, take care, be good, and see you next time.